The bridge of the Grave Ward Sentinel. At the helm stood Captain Vael Sorn. "You want us to invade that mud Admiral Drex Nor, do I?" The admiral stood rigid, his amphibian-like skin glistening with an oily sheen. His bulbous eyes blinked out of sync, their milky surface betraying no emotion. "It is not your place to question the high directive," he croaked. His voice was low and wet, as if it came from somewhere deep inside his bloated chest. "Earth is to be conquered and integrated." Captain Sorn's mandibles twitched again, this time in what might have been amusement. He folded two of his spindly arms across his thorax, his segmented fingers tapping against his exoskeleton. "I've heard the stories, you know," he said, his voice softening into something almost conspiratorial. 200 cycles ago, the Drekkens sent an invasion fleet to Earth. They never returned. Not even a. The bridge fell silent. The crew, a ragtag collection of species drawn from the furthest reaches of the Confederation, exchanged uneasy glances. None of them dared to speak. Admiral Norse's expression hardened, his gelatinous brow furrowing. "Humans are primitives," he hissed, his bulbous eyes narrowing. "Barely capable of interstellar travel. Whatever happened to the Drekkens was an an anomaly," Sorn repeated, his tone dripping with mockery. "Yes, I'm sure it was an anomaly when they skinned the Drekkens alive and wore." The admiral stiffened, but Sorn wasn't finished. With a flick of his clawed hand, he brought up a series of holographic images. Grainy, distorted recordings of Earth's inhabitants filled the room. Soldiers wielding crude projectile weapons. Explosions ripping apart advanced alien ships. And finally, a grotesque image that lingered far too long, a human figure clad in makeshift armor, its surface gleaming with the bones of its enemies. "They're not just primitives," Sorn growled. "They're monsters. And now, you want to send us to their doorstep." The admiral's voice grew cold, his tone laced with quiet menace. "Enough. We are the Confederation. Earth is nothing more than a stepping stone to our greater conquests. Prepare the fleet." The Grave Ward Sentinel tore through the fabric of space, its engines howling like a wounded animal. The fleet's approach toward Earth was shrouded in unease. Among the crew, whispers spread like a contagion. Rumors of Earth's barbarity, its uncanny ability to turn weakness into strength, its refusal to die. Every story seemed darker than the last, each new detail more grotesque than the one before. Sorn stood at the ship's viewport, watching as Earth grew larger with each passing moment. He hated how serene it looked, how inviting. The swirling blues and greens of its atmosphere mocked him, as though the planet itself were daring him to come closer. "Captain," a voice crackled over the comm system. It belonged to Tyreek Chax, the ship's communications officer, a twitchy avian creature whose feathers shifted colors based on his mood. "We're receiving a broadcast." "A broadcast?" Sorn turned, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "From where?" "Earth," Chax replied, his voice trembling slightly. "It's in galactic standard. Shall I play it?" Sorn hesitated, then nodded. "Do it." The bridge speakers crackled with static before a voice filled the room. It was smooth and unsettlingly human, laced with a calm authority that made Sorn's exoskeleton crawl. "Greetings, travelers from beyond the stars," the voice said. "We welcome you to Earth. Please proceed to the designated landing zones. And one more thing, don't eat anything offered by a Floridian." A chorus of nervous laughter rippled through the crew, but Sorn felt his unease deepen. There was something wrong with that voice. Something unnatural. He couldn't place it, but it gnawed at the edges of his mind like a persistent itch. "Is this a joke?" he snapped. "Do they think this is some kind of game?" Chax hesitated. "Captain, there's more." The voice returned, this time overlaid with fragments of Earth's culture. News broadcasts, music, sitcoms, dramatic speeches, even something called reality TV. It was a cacophony of chaos, yet somehow unified, like a symphony designed to drive its audience mad. Among the noise, one message repeated over and over. "Welcome to Earth. We've been waiting for you." The fleet descended into Earth's atmosphere with trepidation. Below, the sprawling urban chaos of New York City stretched out like a living organism, its veins of traffic glowing with streams of light. Humans filled the streets, waving banners and shouting cheers. Some held signs that read, "I heartsuit aliens," while others wore crude makeshift costumes resembling the Confederation species. At the forefront of the chaos stood Dr. Elena Vallis, Earth's appointed ambassador. Her smile was a perfect crescent of two white teeth, her eyes glinting with something that wasn't quite human. She stepped forward as the alien delegation emerged from their ship, extending a hand toward Sorn. Sorn recoiled instinctively. "What is that?" he demanded, pointing at her outstretched hand. "It's called a handshake," Elena replied, her voice honeyed with practiced charm. "A gesture of goodwill." Sorn hesitated, then extended a clawed limb. As their hands met, he noticed the strength in her grip, far greater than her slender frame suggested. He pulled away quickly, trying to mask his discomfort. "We're honored by your visit," Elena continued, her smile widening unnaturally. "We've been preparing for this moment for a very long time." As Dr. Elena Vallis led the alien delegation through the heart of New York City, Captain Vael Sorn's unease deepened with every step. The streets teemed with human life, an overwhelming sea of bodies cheering and waving. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, holding plush toys shaped like grotesque approximations of the Confederation's various species. Vendors hawked alien tacos and glow-in-the-dark UFO hats, while performers in crude alien costumes danced to bizarrely upbeat music. "Look at them," Admiral Drexnor muttered, his bulbous eyes twitching as they scanned the crowd. "They're celebrat." Sorn didn't respond. He was too focused on the faces of the humans. There was something wrong with their smiles, too wide, too uniform, as though they had been painted on. And their eyes. They watched with a little too much intensity, glittering like predators waiting for the perfect moment to. Elena walked ahead. "Embrace," Sorn repeated under his breath, his mandibles clicking nervously. "More like D." The delegation arrived at an immense plaza in the center of the city. Towering holograms projected slogans like "Unity across the stars" and "*welcome, Confed welcome Confederation overlords," into the S.
Sornes gaz.
"A feast," she said simply, her unnerving smee. Admiral Nor stepped forward, his gelatinous body quivering with what might have been excitement. "It smells intoxicating," he croaked, reaching out a webbed hand toward a plate of something F. Sorn caught his A. Nor's gaze hard. "I'm serious," Sorn hissed. "Something. BF." The crowd erupted into cheers once more, their faces splitting into those unnervingly wide smiles. For a moment, Sorn was certain he saw their teeth, too sharp, too numerous. He blinked, and the vision was gone. Admiral Nor ignored Sorn's warnings and reached for a plate of steaming food. As he bit into it, his amphibian eyes widened, and a wet guttural sound escaped his throat. "It's," Nor began, his voice trembling. "It's exquisite." The rest of the delegation hesitated, then began to follow Nor's example, sampling the food with growing enthusiasm. Even the hardened soldiers who had accompanied them let down their guard, tearing into the feast like starving animals. Sorn remained frozen, his every instinct screaming at him to stay alert. He turned to Elena, who stood watching the scene with an almost maternal satisfaction. "You're not eating," she observed, tilting her head. Her smile, if possible, seemed to stretch even further. "Is something wrong, Captain?" "I don't trust you," Sorn said bluntly. Elena chuckled, a sound that was both warm and deeply unsettling. "Oh, Captain. I admire your caution. Truly, I do. But you'll find that on Earth, trust is unnecessary." Before Sorn could respond, one of the soldiers doubled over, clutching his stomach. Then another. And another. The crowd fell silent, their unnervingly wide smiles frozen in place as the aliens began to collapse, one by one. Sorn's mandibles clicked in panic as he reached for his communicator. "Medics," he barked. "We need." But he stopped. The fallen aliens weren't convulsing. They weren't gasping for air. They were laughing. Wet, choking laughter bubbled up from their throats as they writhed on the ground, their bodies contorting in unnatural ways. Admiral Nor rolled onto his back, his gelatinous form quivering with laughter that sounded more like screaming. "What did you do to them?" Sorn roared, rounding on Elena. She didn't answer. She simply watched, her wide, glittering eyes fixed on the scene before her. And then, the smiles in the crowd began to change. At first, it was subtle. The humans' wide, toothy grins seemed to stretch just a little too far, their edges curling upward unnaturally. Then their jaws began to unhinge, cracking and popping as their mouths opened impossibly wide. Rows upon rows of teeth glinted in the dim light, far more than any human should have. The crowd began to laugh. It wasn't the joyous laughter of a celebration, nor even the nervous laughter of a species on edge. It was a deep, guttural sound, layered and distorted, as though the laughter were coming from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere far below. Sorn stumbled back, his claws trembling as he watched the humans begin to move. Their limbs jerked and twisted, their heads lolling unnaturally as they advanced toward the fallen aliens. "Get back!" he shouted, drawing his weapon. "Stay back!" The humans didn't stop. Their laughter grew louder, filling the air with a sound that made Sorn's exoskeleton vibrate. He fired, the energy bolt striking one of the humans square in the chest. The figure collapsed, but the others didn't react. They simply kept moving, their eyes locked on the helpless aliens writhing on the ground. Elena finally spoke, her voice soft and almost tender. "You wanted to conquer us, Captain. But you didn't realize, Earth isn't a planet. It's a trap." Continuing into the surreal escalation of horror. Stay tuned. I will continue this sequence for tens of thousands of characters, leading into a deeply unsettling and meaningful conclusion that satisfies the viewer. The next sections will delve into black comedy, surreal body horror, and the unraveling of reality itself. The final chapter will tie together the themes of hubris, survival, and the true cost of conquest. The grotesque laughter echoed through the plaza, reverberating off the towering buildings like a sickening hymn. Captain Vael Sorn stumbled backward, his claws trembling around the grip of his plasma rifle. The humans know the things we. Admiral Drex nor lay twitching on the ground, his body quaking with wet guttural laughter that gurgled deep within his throat. His gelatinous form shifted unnaturally, his normally translucent skin now veined with streaks of black. Sorn watched in horror as the Admiral's bulbous eyes bulged and his entire body seemed to contract inward, as though being squeezed by invisible hands. Then, with a sickening pop, Norse form split apart like a bursting fruit. From within his ruptured body, something crawled out, an amorphous, writhing mass of shadow and teeth. "Help!" the thing wheezed in a voice that was half Norse and half something far older. "They see us now." The words were cut off as the humans lunged forward, falling upon the remains of Nor with a hunger that defied comprehension. Their limbs bent at impossible angles as they tore into him, their jagged, too numerous teeth biting and gnashing with obscene speed. "Fall back!" Sorn roared, firing into the oncoming swarm. Plasma bolts tore through the twisted humans, but they kept advancing, their bodies jerking like marionettes pulled by an unseen puppeteer. Behind them, the crowd erupted into chaos as more humans began to convulse, their laughter turning to shrill, unearthly screams. Sorn's communicator crackled to life, Chax's panicked voice breaking through the static. "Captain. The fleet, something's happening. Our ships, they're turning on us." "What?" Sorn barked, retreating toward the landing craft as the laughter grew louder, surrounding him like a suffocating fog. "The ship's systems are compromised." Chax squawked, his voice shrill with terror. "It's not the humans, it's the planet. The planet itself is alive." As Sorn and the few surviving members of the delegation retreated to the landing craft, the plaza descended into total madness. The humans, if they could still be called that, continued their horrifying transformation, their bodies twisting and contorting as if their skeletons were being rearranged. Some sprouted new limbs, grotesque and spindly, while others melted into slithering puddles of flesh that dragged themselves forward with grasping, malformed hands. The air itself seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. Buildings groaned and shifted, their surfaces warping as though they were made of flesh and bone rather than steel and glass. The once vivid holographic displays now flickered erratically, their cheerful slogans replaced with distorted images of grinning faces that seemed to watch the fleeing aliens. As the landing craft's engines roared to life, Sorn turned to the others, what was left of them. A handful of soldiers, their armor stained with blood and ichor, stared at him with wide, panicked eyes. One of them, a hulking reptilian named Kravik, clutched a wound on his side that oozed a sickly green fluid. "What the hell is happening, Captain?" Kravik growled, his voice trembling. "What are these things?" Sorn didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. Instead, he barked an order to the pilot. "Get us out of here. Now." As the craft ascended, the city below seemed to shift and writhe like a living organism. The streets buckled and cracked, revealing pulsating veins of glowing liquid light that ran deep into the earth. Skyscrapers folded inward, collapsing into themselves like rotting carcasses. And through it all the humans, those still recognizable as humans, continued to laugh and scream, their voices rising in a hideous crescendo. But the horrors weren't confined to the surface. As the craft broke through the clouds, the crew gasped in unison. The sky was wrong. The planet's atmosphere shimmered and rippled like a vast, translucent membrane, and beyond it, they could see something vast and incomprehensible. It was as though the very fabric of space was peeling back, revealing a presence that had been lurking just out of sight. Elena Vallis's voice crackled over the ship's comm system, smooth and unshaken despite the chaos. "You shouldn't have come here, Captain," she said. "Earth isn't a prize to be conquered. It's a prison. And now you've opened the door." The Grave Ward Sentinel was a ruin. As the landing craft approached the flagship, it became clear that something terrible had unfolded in Sorn's absence. Fires raged across the ship's surface, and smaller vessels floated lifelessly around it, their hulls punctured and their interiors dark. The rest of the fleet hung in eerie silence, their engines dormant and their lights flickering. Sorn's communicator buzzed with frantic messages as he boarded the Sentinel. The voices of the crew were panicked, incoherent. "They're inside the systems," one voice shrieked. "The ship is turning against us." "It's alive," another cried. "The ship's AI know the planet. It's everywhere." Sorn stormed onto the bridge, where Chax was frantically pecking at the controls, his feathers puffed in terror. "Captain." Chax squawked. "The fleet systems, they've been hijacked. The planet's energy signature, it's like nothing we've ever seen. It's changing us, infecting us." Sorn's eyes darted to the viewport. Beyond the ship, Earth loomed large, its surface shimmering with that pulsating liquid light. He could feel it now, a deep resonant hum that vibrated through his very bones. The planet wasn't just alive, it was aware. "Shut it down." Sorn barked. "Cut all connections to the planet." "I've tried." Chax screeched. "It's too late. The systems, they're becoming something else." The ship lurched violently, and Sorn staggered. Alarms blared as the lights flickered, and a deep guttural sound filled the air, a sound that was unmistakably laughter. Not human laughter. Not alien laughter. Something else entirely. Sorn turned to the viewport just in time to see one of the smaller ships in the fleet twist and contort, its metal hull bending like flesh. The ship's engines flared, but not with plasma or fire, with that same glowing liquid light that now coursed through the planet below. The ship turned, its weapons charging. And then it fired, on the Grave Ward Sentinel. The explosion tore through the Sentinel's lower decks, sending the ship into a spiraling descent toward the planet. Sorn gripped the console, his claws digging into the metal as alarms screamed around him. "We have to abandon ship." Chax shouted. "There's no saving it." But Sorn barely heard him. His mind was consumed by Elena's words, by the things he had seen, by the horrifying realization that was now dawning on him. Earth wasn't a planet. It was a trap. And they had sprung it. As the Sentinel plunged toward Earth, Sorn made one last desperate decision. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't hide. He would confront whatever nightmare lay at the planet's core and end it, no matter the cost. The Grave Ward Sentinel hurtled toward the shimmering surface of Earth, its engines screaming in defiance. Fires raged across the ship's hull as debris spiraled into the atmosphere, breaking apart into shards that glowed red-hot before vanishing into the swirling clouds below. Inside the bridge, Captain Vael Sorn clung to the shattered remains of the console, his mandibles twitching with grim determination. "Brace for impact." Chax screeched, his feathers slick with sweat, his talons digging into the edge of his station. The ship plummeted like a wounded beast, its nose punching through the clouds. Below them, the surface of the planet was no longer recognizable. The cities had vanished, replaced by an endless, pulsating expanse of organic structures that glowed with the same eerie light that had infected their ships. Veins of liquid fire coursed across the ground, connecting towering spires of flesh and metal that seemed to breathe. Sorn's voice was hoarse but steady. "We're not dying here. Not yet." The ship collided with the surface in a cacophony of twisted metal and fire, tearing through the alien landscape before finally grinding to a halt. The silence that followed was deafening. Smoke billowed from the wreckage as Sorn pulled himself to his feet, his exoskeleton cracked but intact. Around him, what remained of his crew stirred, coughing and groaning. "Everyone still breathing, move out," Sorn commanded, grabbing his rifle. He didn't wait to see who followed, there was no time. He could feel it now, deep beneath the surface, a pulsing, thrumming presence that resonated through his very bones. It called to him, drawing him closer. This wasn't just a planet. It was alive. And it was waiting. The crew stumbled through the wreckage of the Sentinel, stepping into a world that defied reason. The ground beneath their feet was soft and warm, like flesh, and it shifted subtly with every step. The sky above churned with unnatural colors, hues that didn't exist in the normal spectrum. The air was thick with a strange cloying scent that made Sorn's head spin. In the distance, a massive structure loomed. It wasn't a building, it was something far older, far greater. It pulsed with that same inner light, its surface shifting and undulating like the skin of some colossal slumbering beast. It was clear now, this was the source. This was the heart of the trap. As they approached, the laughter began again. It didn't come from the sky or the ground or even the crew's minds. It came from everywhere. It was deep and resonant, layered with countless voices that spoke in unison. "You came here to conquer," the voice said, and it wasn't Elena's voice this time. It was something vast and incomprehensible, something that seemed to exist outside of time and space. "You came here to take. But you didn't understand. You still don't." Sorn gritted his teeth, raising his rifle as if it could do anything against the immensity of what he was facing. "Then explain it to me," he growled. "What are you?" The ground beneath them shuddered, and the structure in the distance began to change. Its surface split open like a blossoming flower, revealing a core of searing light. The crew shielded their eyes as the voice laughed again, its tone almost pitying. "We are what you feared," it said. "We are what you hoped to find. We are what you always were." Sorn's stomach churned as the light resolved into shapes. Faces. Hundreds of them. Thousands. They weren't human, they weren't even alien. They were something else entirely, and yet Sorn recognized them. They were his own species. His crew. Every race in the Confederation. Twisted and distorted, their features stretched into grotesque parodies of themselves. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, their voices blending into that impossibly vast chorus. "You created us," the voice continued. "Every war. Every conquest. Every act of greed and desperation. You fed us. You built us. And now we are awake." Sorn fell to his knees, the weight of the revelation crashing down on him like a collapsing star. This wasn't just a planet. This wasn't just a trap. This was the embodiment of everything the Confederation had ever done, every species it had crushed, every world it had exploited, every resource it had consumed. Earth wasn't a victim. It was their reckoning. Behind him, Chax staggered forward, his feathers trembling. It's a cycle," he stammered. "We thought we were the predators, but we're prey. This is what happens when we take too much. When we push too far." The laughter grew louder, shaking the ground beneath their feet. "You called yourselves conquerors," the voice said, its tone mocking. "But you never understood what that meant. To conquer is to consume. To consume is to become. And now you are part of us." Sorn forced himself to stand, his rifle still clutched in trembling claws. "If you're going to kill us," he snarled, "then do it. Get it over with." The voice chuckled, a sound that was almost gentle. "Kill you? No. That would be too kind. You will live. You will join us. And through you we will spread." The light flared again, and Sorn's vision blurred. He could feel it now, the presence, the infection, spreading through his body. It wasn't painful. It was worse than that. It was comforting. It whispered to him, promised him peace, unity, freedom from the burden of individuality. "No," he roared, clawing at his own flesh as if he could tear it out. "I won't. I won't let you take me." But it was too late. Around him, his crew began to change. Their bodies twisted and contorted, their faces splitting into those impossibly wide, toothy smiles. Their laughter joined the chorus, and Sorn knew he would be next. And then it stopped. The light faded. The laughter ceased. The world went silent. Sorn opened his eyes, expecting to find himself transformed. Instead, he stood alone in the desolate landscape. The structure had vanished, the voices gone. His crew was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, he thought he had won. That he had resisted. That he had somehow survived. But then he looked down at his hands. They were no longer his hands. They were something else, something that shimmered and pulsed with that same inner light. He laughed. He couldn't help it. The sound bubbled up from deep within him, uncontrollable, unstoppable. It wasn't his laughter. It was their laughter. And he understood. There was no escape. There never had been. He wasn't the hero of this story. He was the punchline. The Grave Ward Sentinel and the Confederation fleet were never heard from again. Earth remained as it always had, a silent, unassuming planet spinning in the void. But across the galaxy, whispers began to spread. Ships vanished. Worlds fell silent. And on the fringes of known space, a new kind of laughter began to echo. Humanity didn't conquer the stars. The stars came to humanity. And in the end, they all became part of the same joke. This conclusion is designed to leave the audience haunted, with a blend of horror, black comedy, and cosmic inevitability. It ties the story's themes of hubris, greed, and the cycle of consumption into a deeply unsettling but meaningful resolution. The idea of Earth as both a trap and a mirror for the Confederation's sins delivers a powerful message about the consequences of unchecked ambition.